Good morning, everyone. So I'm Travis Breeding, and I'm talking about my new life here in Fishers, Indiana, and autism. So I grew up on the autism spectrum without knowing it, and I had a struggle making friends and building relationships and things like that. And so but I'm here to talk to you. I'm here to share my story and provide hope and inspiration to know that you too can live your best life and live an amazing life with the right supports and with people who care about you in your life and things like that. And so I'm just really excited to be here, and let's get started. So I was diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome in the fall of 2007. On October 30th, 2007, I was 22 years old when I found that I had autism. And I was struggling to build relationships and friendships. I had several failed experiences at college and universities. I wasn't fitting in anywhere. I wasn't making friends. I was having trouble with boundaries and relationships, coming on too strong with people, overwhelming them, things like that. Just typical things that autistic people might do. And I really struggled with building those relationships and things like that. And so I went to counseling at my university because counseling was free at my university. So I went into counseling to get some help with my autism, and obviously I didn't know that I had autism at the time, but I was just going in to get some help with being socially awkward because I knew I was socially awkward. So this was the fall of 2007. I started to want a girlfriend, right? So I was Googling, like, how do you get a girlfriend? And I was coming up with all this negative information about, like, how to be a bad boy, how to get pickup artists, things like that. Which is just really bad information that we don't want. We don't want autistic men particularly, to come across, because it's just an unhealthy way to form relationships with people. It's unauthentic, and what we want is real, authentic relationships. So that approach was going to lead to masking and hiding my autism from people, which was manipulative in a sense, because I was trying to learn how to be someone that I wasn't in order to get people to like me. Now that's a very phenomenon type of thing to say, right? Because it's like, well, why would someone try to be someone they're not in order to get someone to like them? What leads someone with autism to believe, that we have to be someone we're not in order to get someone to like us? And I think it's just through years and years and years and years of experiences to where, we grew up being rejected for who we were. So we felt like, I felt like, being who I wasn't appropriate or wasn't okay. So I felt like that I was inappropriate because the way people were responding to me socially. And that's not okay for someone to end up feeling like that. And we don't want people to feel like that ever. And so, I continued in counseling. I went to the counselors and said, how do you get a girlfriend? Like, why don't girls like me? Why do they think I'm weird and creepy? Things like that. And the counselors immediately knew, and they thought, this one particular counselor was like, there's more to it than that. It's got to be deeper than that, because it's not just an issue with girls. It's an issue with dating and relationships and friendships. And, the more we explored it, the more we realized that there were some other issues going on. And so we started doing some testing, and we did a lot of talk therapy, and we started to find out, that this may be autism. And particularly at the time, we were talking about Asperger Syndrome because, Asperger Syndrome is still a thing in the DSM, and so that was really, really, an important topic, right? Lots of people in 2007, 2007 to 2013, were being diagnosed as Aspies and being diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome. And so what we know of Asperger Syndrome then is now what we call level 1 autism in DSM-5. But yeah, so I struggled. It all started in elementary school, right? So I was a late bloomer. I developed these fine motor skills, what I call them, like the ability to hold the pencil, the ability to color with crayons and things like that. I just developed these fine motor skills at a later age in life. And I knew I started kindergarten a year late. So I didn't start kindergarten until I was 6 years old. And, by that point, I had developed a little bit better. I had ability to hold the pencil, hold the crayons a little bit. I still colored outside the lines, right? So in fact, one of the chapters of my autobiography is called Coloring Outside the Lines, because I don't know how to color inside the lines. I still struggle with that today, because I'm not very neat in my writing, in my penmanship and things like that. And elementary school, kindergarten was very fun. I went to preschool, but I didn't really have a lot of social interaction in preschool. But I met this one kid named Eric in preschool, and he was a cool guy, and we became friends. And we just it's really easy to make friends in preschool, guys. All you gotta do is show up, right? So you show up and you just follow someone around and you hang out with them, and oh cool, let's be friends. There's not a lot of social rules involved in the friendship aspect of things when you're in, elementary school or preschool and things like that. And so elementary school is pretty much the same as preschool to start out with kindergarten through the third grade years, I would say. And I was friends with Eric, and I ended up meeting a lot of other kids through Eric, because Eric was a very social kid. Eric was pretty popular. The other kids liked him and things like that. So he was kind of like the focal point or the foundation of our friendship circle, right? So everybody made friends through Eric. And then one day, Eric comes in and he tells us one morning that his dad received a job. We lived in Indiana, right? So I lived in Huntington, Indiana. And Eric comes in and tells us as a group that his dad just accepted a position in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And so my best friend Eric was going to be moving to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. This was 5th grade. I was pretty devastated, but I didn't realize at the time, how that would impact me, or how that would make me, prevent me from making friends and things like that. And, or how that would take that network away from me, because he was that social connection to the other kids. So I didn't realize how important he was in my ability to build friendships. And so Eric moves away in 5th grade, right? And, I'm starting over. I'm trying to make new friends again. I had a teacher named Mrs. Ross, who was really phenomenal, really good teacher. She tried to introduce me to these other kids. She set me up with a kid named Austin to try and be my friend. And 5th grade came along, and I was a big sports fan, a big basketball fan. And I tried out for the elementary school basketball team, and I made the team. And I remember Austin made the team, my cousin Dusty made the team. We were all together, and by 6th grade, we were on the starting 5, right? And we played together, we played together in 6th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. We didn't do a lot of playing in 5th grade, but by 6th grade, we were starting and playing and things like that. So I had some social acquaintances through that basketball team. But we never really were friends, I don't think. Looking back now and knowing what friendship is, I just don't think that we were ever really close friends on the basketball team. We were acquaintances and we did stuff together, but it was more like Dr. Tony Atwood, who's a phenomenal Autism, Asperger Syndrome, and specifically author of books on Asperger Syndrome. He knows a lot about Asperger's and talks a lot about it, but he will tell you that those are what we call associates, right? So associates are people that we interact with, but we don't necessarily build friendships with them. They're there for us to practice with, but we don't build social relationships with them. We don't hang out with them outside of the situation in which they're our associate, right? So it became very important to me to practice those skills with associates in elementary school. Things were very challenging by the late elementary school years. It's very interesting to note how social behavior changes between that 5th grade elementary year to that 6th grade middle school year. So it's very interesting to note how that changes, right? So in 5th grade, you're still kind of playing on the playground. You're kind of just you're not so worried about what's cool, what's not cool. and there's definitely not as much gossip or, the gossip level is very low in 5th grade. And you can kind of just be yourself. You're kind of finding yourself, you're finding your ways in life. You can be yourself and things like that. And I was very comfortable in 5th grade still, even though Eric had moved away. I did rely on Eric for making friends, but I wasn't at the point to where I felt like I was gonna have a meltdown, if I lost Eric. So I was doing pretty well until 6th grade. And for me, it was actually, I want to clarify this because I'm older. So like in our particular school district, the transition between elementary school to middle school happened between 6th and 7th grade, not between 5th and 6th grade like it does now. So middle school was still 7th and 8th grade, and elementary school was K through 6. So I made that transition to 5th and 6th grade, and social behavior changed drastically, right? So in elementary school, I had many girls who were very nice to me. They knew that I was different. They could tell that I was awkward and had some issues socializing and things like that. And they knew I was different, and they were very nurturing, and they saw me as intriguing, I think. And they wanted to help me, and they wanted to take care of me. Very motherly instincts with me. And that was perfect, because they helped me. I wasn't really best friends with anyone, but they were nice to me, right? And they helped me get through school. And so I immediately switching from 5th to 6th grade, or 6th grade to 7th grade, in my transition between elementary school to middle school, noticed that the girls' behavior towards me changed. So they used to be very nurturing and would go out of their way to help me. Now in 7th grade, they started trying to avoid me and stay away from me. And I think it was because, looking back at the situation, I think it was because they were afraid that I thought they were pretty, or that I thought they were, I was attracted to them. So that's something that obviously changes between elementary school and middle school is, you go through puberty, right? And you start to develop feelings for the opposite sex or the same sex or whatever way you swing. And so, you go through developing those feelings, and autistic people, we're going to talk a lot about puberty, but autistic people really just don't know how to process those feelings, right? And when we try and process those feelings, we don't know how to communicate our feelings with our peers, and those can make for some very awkward social relationships because we're not sure how to interact with our peers and how to communicate our desire to get to know them and things like that. So here I was, a late bloomer. I didn't go through puberty like the other kids did. I was a late bloomer, and I started to try to interact with these girls in middle school the same way that I was trying to interact with them in elementary school. And that really caused me great difficulty because the girls' behavior was changing. The girls' social behavior was changing. So, the girls were kind of on guard now, and they didn't want to, hang out with me or mold me or, help me. They didn't want to help me as much because they were afraid that I would like them. I think as we age and go through puberty, typical people, especially typical women will, they don't mind being nice to people. They like to be nice to you, but I think as women, sometimes they fear that if they're nice to a guy, that guy might misinterpret that as, oh my gosh, she likes me. And then that obviously triggers all these emotions and this chain reaction of events that's going to go on, that's going to lead to possibly stalking, developing a crush, and things like that. And so I think women sometimes are very careful not to lead people on by being nice to them. But that was very confusing for me because, the women were always very, very nice to me in elementary school. The girls were. And then all of a sudden they stopped being as nice to me in middle school. And I wasn't sure, why did they stop being nice to me and things like that. And so I really struggled with middle school. I hated passing periods. I absolutely hated passing periods. But there's lots of changes in middle school. So we went from one teacher all day long with a few special classes with different teachers. In elementary school, Now all of a sudden I had about 7 or 8 different teachers throughout the day for about 45 minutes at a time. And, I wasn't prepared for all the changing environments and classrooms. So I was someone who liked consistency. I liked the same teaching style. I liked all the same things every single day, right? Because I wasn't getting that in middle school, I started to struggle academically. I had straight A's in elementary school. By middle school, I was getting B's and C's just because we had started changing courses every 45 minutes. I had a different teacher every 45 minutes. I wasn't used to that. The passing periods were very stressful for me. But I had to adapt to the fact that we had 8 different teachers with 8 different teaching styles throughout the day. And with autism, that was very challenging for me, because I like the consistency of the same routine every single day. Now, eventually in middle school, as the year goes on, I start to develop this routine, right? And I get it, but unfortunately, by the time I would develop this routine, the semester, the 9 weeks would end, and I would have all new classes and all new teachers, and things like that. So about the time I was getting comfortable with the routine, it was time for the routine to change again, and I'd spend the next few months trying to get comfortable to, the next few weeks trying to get comfortable to a changing routine. And so, I struggled in middle school. The passing period is absolutely dreadful for me. Neurotypical kids like to congregate in the hallway, make a lot of noise, chatter, talk. It's so different than elementary school, because in elementary school you're like in straight lines, you're found in straight lines, you're walking everywhere together, you're not wandering the hallways on your own. So it's very structured in elementary school, and there was no structure to the passing period in middle school. Lots of kids like to congregate in front of my locker and things like that, and just really stressed me out a little bit, because I had to work through that and had to go through how to get them to let me get to my locker so I could get my books for the next class, or I had to ask them say excuse me and ask them for permission to get my coat out of my locker at the end of the day so I could go home, things like that. And I just wasn't really there was just a lot of clutter in the hallway, and it kind of stressed me out. At the time, I didn't realize how stressful it was, and I didn't obviously know why it was stressful, but it was stressing me out tremendously because I didn't know how to embark upon that passing period. I didn't know how to navigate that passing period. And it would get worse as I got in the later middle school year and then in the high school, because there was a lot more kids at high school than there was in middle school. So I graduated from a class of about 600 from Huntington North High School, which meant there was about 2,000 total kids in all 4 grades. So the high school was pretty packed, pretty jam-packed, and it was pretty, it was a fun experience, but it was just overwhelming for me. So the passing periods are loud and noisy. You got the sensory overload going on. It's like, how do you get from point A to point B? Occasionally, I would end up going to a class without books that I needed because I was trying to avoid going to my locker and avoid going out into the passing period and things like that. And, so I eventually, obviously would struggle academically because I would just kind of pretend to be taking notes when I wasn't really taking notes. I wasn't a great note taker anyways, so I really struggled with, paying attention in class. So I've never been diagnosed with ADHD. I'd like to pursue getting a diagnosis of ADD because I think I have ADD, but I have a hard time focusing on something for more than 5 minutes at a time. So, unless it's a special interest, okay? So if it's a special interest, I can focus on something for long periods of time. And that's really something that I, am good at, is if I find something that's a special interest, I can focus on them for long periods of time. Now, the problem with that, for me in my life, has been that, for me, I developed special interest in people, especially women. And when you develop a special interest in a woman, right, that's a very bad thing, especially if she's neurotypical and she's not interested in you. It's probably a bad thing too if they're on the spectrum, right, and they're not interested in you. But the things about, I just find it so much more stressful with a neurotypical woman because there's so many more social expectations and you're expected to follow the social boundaries and things like that. And so I really struggled with, stalking for a long time in the early high school years to my college years because I didn't know how to build relationships. I was overstepping boundaries. One of the things that got me into trouble in college was when I would get at someone's information and send them a message on social media without getting their consent to send them a message on social media. So that was very, to me, like, I didn't understand how contacting someone online could be intrusive. And like, because I don't know, like, I don't feel that way, I don't experience that, I don't have the same reaction to that as women do. And so I didn't know how that made me feel. And I remember growing up and going through high school, going through college, the only thing I ever dreamed of having was a book that would explain to me why women think that I'm weird or why women think that I'm creepy. Because unfortunately, being a very black and white thinker, I tend to, I need direction. I need black or white, solid advice and feedback, right? And so I needed to be able to learn what I was doing that made someone feel uncomfortable. So I was waiting on someone to write that book that could explain to me exactly what I was doing that made someone feel uncomfortable. The problem with that is it's not black and white. There is no clear-cut definition of what creepy is or what weird is or things like that. And so you really have to begin to understand that you have to try things out by trial and error. And it's a very gray area. It's uncomfortable for me because I'm not familiar with it. I can't process the gray area. I'm very black and white. But like, I just wanted someone to tell me what I was doing that was making them feel weirded out. And recently, I'm 36 years old now, right? And I'm actually encountering my first experience with someone making me feel uncomfortable at 36 years old. And so I'm learning what that feels like and learning, oh, this is what that's like. And I'm thinking of trying to start to understand, this is what I was doing to women when I was trying to push or force getting to know them. And this is why they feel like I'm stalking them, because I feel like I'm being stalked by someone else right now. In a sense, not like crazy like stalker. It's just like overstepping boundaries and things like that. But yeah, so it's interesting to see how when someone else does it to you, then all of a sudden that mind blindness that we talk about so much with autism, that mind blindness goes away. So the question becomes for me, and let's think about this here, is mind blindness really a symptom of autism? Or is it a symptom of just never experiencing things that typical people experience? So in other words, is mind blindness a direct result of autism spectrum disorder, like as a symptom of autism? Or is it an indirect result of, just being, not experiencing things that typical people experience because you're on the autism spectrum? My hunch is, for me, that mind blindness is an indirect result of being autistic, right? So, so many things that I would like to experience, I haven't experienced, and so many things that typical people experience, I don't experience in the same way that they do. So I think it's that creates the mind blindness for me, as opposed to just, it's a symptom of autism, you're autistic, so you're naturally going to experience mind blindness. Now, there are some common things, like, let's talk about theory of mind for a second. There are some things with autism to where there is a deficit in your ability to process logical reasoning. And that is, that creates obviously some mind blindness that way, but that is a direct result of autism, and that is a theory of mind issue, in my opinion, versus the indirect issue of just not having the experience to be able to recall, this is what that's like, this is what that feels like. So one of the things that got me into trouble in college was I was going to a private school at the time because I started out, well, let's talk about college, okay? So I started out going to Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, and I had studied music education and trombone performance there because I was a trombone player. One of the things that really carried me through high school and some of the social challenges that I had in high school was that I played the trombone, and I was really good at playing the trombone, and it was my special interest, and so I did it well, and I did it up until 22 years old when I was diagnosed with Asperger Syndrome. And so I went to IU in Bloomington, Indiana, and this is before I was diagnosed with autism, and the school was just so overwhelming. I had trouble because I wasn't included. I struggled with the community inclusion right away, and it was no one's fault but mine, because unfortunately, I had a bedwetting issue. And this meant that I was kind of embarrassed to live in a dorm with a bunch of other kids because I had a bedwetting issue. And so I was able to petition the university. Most of the time they require freshmen to live on campus when you're going to school. But I was able to petition, the university to allow me to live off campus. So I got my own apartment, started living off campus, and things like that. And I started to go to school, go to classes down there, and things like that. And I remember the summer, in between my freshman year and in between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college, going to a band camp type of thing, or freshman orientation mixer type of thing. And I met this girl named Christy who played the clarinet. And I was immediately interested in her, and I thought she was fascinating, and I wanted to get to know her. And so I started talking to her, and we talked for like an hour that day at the orientation, and we kind of became sort of good acquaintances. I always struggle now with the idea of saying that we're good friends, because I know now that there's so much more. I used to think that acquaintances were friends, but really acquaintances aren't friends. They're just acquaintances. You have to actually really develop a friendship with someone and get to know someone, and it takes a long period of time. So you don't become friends with someone in 2 days or 1 hour of a conversation like I had with Kristen. You become friends with someone over weeks and months of conversating and getting to know one another. I used to think that I had a lot of friends because I had a lot of acquaintances. And now that I know what I know about autism and boundaries and relationships, I don't think that I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of acquaintances. And so it's very fascinating how that works. But yeah, so I immediately met this girl, Christy, and I got her information. So we talked online over the summer, and we went back to school, and I was expecting to get to know her and develop a relationship with her or a friendship with her, and it was just so overwhelming because there were so many other kids, so many other people trying to interact with her, develop relationships with her, and unfortunately, I didn't know how to develop friendships and relationships at the time. I thought I could just be who I was, which in reality turns out, ironically, that you can just be who you are. But I would go through a phase to where, probably a 10-year phase, where I didn't think you could be who you were because of my social experiences. But because I didn't know how to develop a relationship with this girl, I was overwhelmed. There were 60,000 kids on campus at IU in Bloomington, and I ended up, being so overwhelmed that I had a meltdown at college. I would say that experience at Bloomington was my first ever meltdown. I was 19 years old, because remember I had started kindergarten a year late, so I didn't graduate high school until I was 19. So I was 19 years old, and I was really struggling, and I had this this big meltdown. So 2 weeks into my college experience at Indiana University in Bloomington, I call mom and dad up on the phone, right? And I say, I'm crying. And I'm saying, this isn't working out. I'm overwhelmed. I need to get out of here. I need to come home. And it was terrible because I had just spent all this money getting my own apartment because I had to live off campus. So I had to break a lease. I had to do all this stuff, and I had to move back home. And it was just crazy to me how overwhelming it was. And nobody understood why it was overwhelming to me. And I couldn't put it into words why it was overwhelming at the time, because I didn't know that I had autism, right? And I didn't know that I needed to be able to put it into words or explain to people why this is overwhelming to me. But it was so scary. So I ended up leaving Indiana University. I go from Bloomington, Indiana back to Huntington, Indiana. I start living at home again with my parents. My first attempt at living on my own as an adult was failed. It lasted 2 weeks. And I go back to living at home with my parents. Now I need to do something with my life, right? So I go back to my job, my high school job, to where I worked at Ponderosa Steakhouse. And I go back to my job, and I get my job back. I start working there, and I start to develop a routine as the buffet guy. Everyone in Huntington knew me as the Ponderosa buffet guy because I took care of the buffet. And that was like a special interest to me for a little bit. It helped me, gain some valuable skills and things like that. And so I immediately, like I said, I did that, but I also knew that I wanted to go to school. So I enrolled in Indiana Wesleyan University because I knew the band director there. The band director at Indiana Wesleyan University was actually my middle school band director, Mr. Flanagan, and he was a phenomenal guy, a big sports fan. Like, we talked a lot about sports. I hung out with him before and after school. I was one of those annoying students that would go to the classroom before school and hang out in the band room after school, and things like that. And I really just spent time getting to know him, and I liked him, and he was a great teacher. So I enroll in these college courses. I take the band classes, right? I take music education, and I start to develop some relationships there. Now, the issue I've always had with social relationships is that they're very imbalanced for me. So this is where friendship-acquaintance ratio comes in for me. I tend to make friends a lot faster than what typical people tend to make friends. And I'm not so bad at making friends, in a sense, because I know how to be nice to people, and I know how to care for people and things like that. But it's the idea of maintaining the friendship that is exhausting to me and overwhelming to me. So maintaining the friendship is very hard. And so I struggled with that, and it took me a great number of years to be able to get to the point where I could maintain a friendship. And now my longest friendship now is 10 years with my friend Heather, and I've maintained that friendship very well. But it's very difficult for me to focus on that and to concentrate on that. I go to this, I sign up for band classes, so I'm working nearly full-time at Ponderosa Steakhouse, and I'm taking part-time college classes at the university, Indiana Wesleyan University, and I'm playing my trombone, doing my job, so I'm doing two of my special interests. I'm attending to the buffet at Ponderosa Steakhouse, and I'm playing my trombone in the band at IU, Indiana Wesleyan University. So I'm doing two things that I love, and yet something's still not clicking for me. I'm still not happy. And at this point in my life, I was nearly 21 years old, and I was starting to develop depression. The anxiety had already developed, right? So the anxiety was there, it was really strong, and I started to develop depression. And the depression became really intense, and I started having suicidal thoughts. I just wasn't getting the human interaction, the human connection that I desired and that I needed. And that really, really led to me going through some really rough periods of time. So I was suicidal. I wasn't talking to people about my feelings. I was trying to hide them. And I was going to work, doing all these things. And I was just struggling to get through life. And at the same time, I kept trying to develop relationships. I was really focused on a relationship with a girl because I was 21 years old. I had finally went through puberty. I had finally developed feelings for women, but I had no idea how to interact with them. So I was basically just throwing myself at them and hoping they would like me for who I was. And obviously, coming on too strong was a bad thing. I started going to counseling. Counselors were like, my family was like, well, just be who you are. It'll be okay. The issue I ran into with being who I was that even as you're being someone who you are, as you are being, the person that you are the person God intended you to be, you still have to maintain social boundaries. You can't just be who you are and overstep boundaries. So like the problem with being who you are, if you have bad boundaries, is that you're actually coming on too strong and scaring people away. And the problem with telling someone, with autism to just be who you are, if they struggle with boundaries, is that you're reinforcing them being coming on too strong. You're reinforcing bad boundaries because you're just saying like, well, just be who you are. It's part of who you are. Just be who you are. But if you have bad boundaries, you're reinforcing those negative boundaries, and you're going to scare people away. So you don't necessarily want to reinforce being who you are to autistic people unless you can get them to understand the difference between being who you are versus boundaries. And it's a very gray concept, right? It's a very gray area. So you're going to confuse the crap out of someone with autism if you try and tell them to just be who you are, when other people are going to reject them for that very reason, because of the boundary issue. So one of the things that happened to me at Indiana Wesleyan was I was using Facebook at the time, and Facebook Messenger, Facebook Messenger wasn't really a thing yet. So I was just using Facebook, and we were like, back in the day, this was like 2005, 2006, we had instant messengers before we had Facebook Messenger. So we had AIM Instant Messenger, AOL, we had MSN Messenger, I don't even know what else we had, Yahoo Messenger. We had all those different types of messengers where we could interact with our peers online. And when Facebook first came out, it left a spot for people to put their contact information on a page on Facebook. And so, oftentimes people would put their cell phone number on their Facebook contact page, or their AOL Instant Messenger on their Facebook contact page. And so the information was there for public view to get your information and to contact you. And that's exactly what I thought it was for. So I would find a girl I liked, and I would meet her one time in person. Or sometimes I would actually search Facebook to find people that I liked, because I was having a hard time meeting people in person. And the problem with that is, you don't really know much about a person on Facebook, that if you're just randomly searching them to find them. You're basically basing your interest in them off of a picture, which is bad for so many reasons. But so you're just adding random people to Facebook, and then you're finding out their contact information, right? Through all these channels, or through this Facebook contact page. So I would get somebody's phone number, for example, and I would send them a text message and say, hey, how you doing? How's your day going? And things like that. And so I would, obviously girls thought that was weird. Women thought that was creepy. So I didn't have a lot of success in meeting people that way. And so I turned to, I also did the same thing with AIM Instant Messenger. So people would put their AOL Messenger screen name on their Facebook profile, and I would just contact them and things like that, and start conversations with them. I thought I was being completely harmless. I mean, after all, I'm just sitting behind a computer typing into my keyboard, or sitting behind my phone, talking on my phone to you. How could I possibly be hurting you, or things like that? Now, something to remember is I'm very black and white, right? So I tend to think of when a woman says, I still struggle with this today, even when my friend says, you're making me uncomfortable, I associate that, I overgeneralize that. So because uncomfortable is gray to me, but hurting is very black and white. You're either hurting someone or you're not hurting someone. But uncomfortable is kind of in between. And I struggle with understanding what that means. I think the difference is black and white is written. So it's either this or that. There's a written definition of black and white. With the gray area of making someone uncomfortable, there was no written definition of that for me to go off of. And so, when I'm making someone uncomfortable, there's nothing for me to define that by. And that's where I struggle with understanding my behavior, because there's no operational definition of it, and things like that. And so I tend to I was having a hard time, and I was coming on too strong. I was making people feel uncomfortable, but I needed that black and white definition of I was hurting someone or not. And unfortunately, when somebody tells me that I'm making them feel uncomfortable, I start to feel really guilty and really bad about myself because I feel like I'm hurting them, because I overgeneralize that to, oh, it's uncomfortable, so uncomfortable is hurting. It goes up here, and it just escalates, and then my emotions all are sensory overloaded by emotions. It's like I'm picking up on all these emotions that are confusing me and telling me that I'm hurting someone, I'm a bad person because I'm hurting someone, and things like that. And so it becomes really difficult for me to, to understand that I'm just making someone feel uncomfortable and I'm not hurting them. So, but yeah, it was a real struggle. So that was kind of my experience from now up until the first part of college. So this is kind of part one of my lived experience with autism. And part two is going to detail, excuse me, part two, and tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit more about my experience with getting a diagnosis, pursuing a diagnosis with autism, and going after learning social skills, learning about social thinking, social context, and all of those types of things. So, but one of the things I want you to think about tonight, as you're processing all this information you've learned today about autism, is that people with autism are very black and white. So I almost prefer to have laws instead of social rules. I would prefer to have laws, because laws are very written. Laws are very black and white. And when I have laws, I can follow those a little bit better. So I would prefer to have written laws that are social rules versus just having like unwritten rules. So written rules are always better for me than unwritten rules. And I think that's pretty common for all autistic people in general, right? So, but yeah, so tomorrow we're going to talk a lot more about my lived experience as an adult, getting a diagnosis, going through some services. We're going to talk about community inclusion versus hanging out in the community, because that's very important. We're going to talk about how I became an author, and how I started writing my journey with autism and sharing my lived experience with people. And we're just going to have a good conversation about autism. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in this morning to watch this video and learn about autism a little bit, and we'll see you tomorrow.